What's up, book nerds? Welcome to today's podcast. Today we're going to be interviewing author Justin Newland. He's been with us before and we're excited to talk to him again. We're going to be talking about his story, The Genes of Isis. And without further ado, let's get into the interview.
Hi, Narry. My name's Justin Newland. This recording is taking place in England for me on a late Wednesday evening, and it's really, really hot here.
Oh boy.
And it seems to be around everywhere. I'm an author of a number of novels of slightly varying genre, mostly historical fiction. But my first novel, which is what we're going to talk about tonight, is called The Genes of Isis. Isis was an Egyptian goddess. And so this novel is set in ancient Egypt and retells the biblical story of the flood. My other novels, the two historical fiction novels, The Old Dragon's Head, which I was lucky enough to talk to Narry about the last time. It's set in Ming Dynasty, China. The Coronation is set in the 7 Years' War in a place called Prussia, which was an embryonic Germany during what was called the Enlightenment period. And my last novel, last published novel, is called The Abdication, and it's set in the Middle East, and it speculates about things like the purpose of free will, and follows a young woman's journey of self-discovery. And I have a novel coming out in September, which is called traces Francis Drake's circumnavigation of the globe, called The Mark of the Salamander. So that's me.
That's exciting. I'm curious too, because that'll be your fifth book, right?
Yes, it will.
Nice. And from what I understood last time that we talked about your novels, they're pretty much read as standalones, but you do kind of hide a little bit of influence from some of your past novels, or like Easter eggs, if you will, in some of the ones that you write. Yeah,
it sort of creeps in. It's interesting the way novels seem to have their own life. I did set out, in this case, with the one on Drake, to write a single novel about England's coming of age during the Elizabethan times, but it's actually turned into two. So I wanted to also write about the Spanish Armada. So that is a separate novel, which I'm also currently going through the beta reading stage. If you know, I'm sure you know what that is.
Yes.
Sort of getting feedback from other interested authors in the genre. So it's great to do.
Absolutely, it's fun because I think kind of going through your different collection of novels and stories, it's like you were slowly traveling the world, but through your perspective and fantasy and also
that's right,
really accurate history.
It's great fun. Yeah, I mean, some of this, to be fair, Egypt, China and Prussia had been an enduring fascination for research, and I'd researched them, even been to Egypt and went to the place in Prussia in my earlier years before I even started writing. So kind of had a head start. And that was possibly why, I mean, they do say when you start writing to write about what you know about.
Right.
Of course, everybody thinks, oh, that's great. Yes, I know a lot about this or I know a lot about that. But actually, when it comes down to it, we don't really know a lot about anything. So we kind of make it up as we go. We have a few fragments, we get a few ideas, and we cobble them together, and somehow a novel comes out of it. So that's what happened with The Genes of Isis. And I suppose if we want to go into talking about that, one of the big clues about, I kind of love words in English language, and you play around with the letters in a word and you always get very interesting results sometimes. Like an anagram of revelation, right? You think would tell you all about how wonderful things are going to be revealed. But your anagram revelation, you get I reveal not.
I like that one.
Very strange. And I don't know if you know anything about Saturnalia, do you? You ever heard
No,
of
it's not familiar to me now.
Okay, it was a 5-day period in ancient Roman history. At the end of the Roman year, they had a 360-day year. And for 5 days, the slaves became masters and the masters became slaves.
Interesting.
Saturnalia actually refers to the planet Saturn. And to carry on the anagram analogy, Saturnalia anagrams to Australian. Okay. So, it really is an upside down place down there. Have you ever been there?
I've never been to Australia. It's on my bucket list. I really need to world travel a little bit more.
Oh, okay. So the genes of Isis come into this novel. Genes of Isis is another way of saying Genesis.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
The letters are very similar, and indeed taken the story elements from the book of Genesis, which is basically the fallen angels, which you've probably heard about, yeah?
Yep.
They sort of land, they reckon from the book of Enoch, that they landed in a place called Mount Hermon, which is between Lebanon and Israel.
Yep.
So you can go there now. Maybe they're still there. Although I'll tell you where they think they are in due course. They mated with the women of the time and produced a sort of mixed species race called the Nephilim. Okay, so they're the story, and then comes the flood, because the powers that be obviously didn't want the human race to have mixed genetics, so they sent the flood to sort out the mess. So they're the story elements that I've taken, but I've woven another story around that. If you like, if the Bible takes the motorway route, then I kind of take what we call the B roads, the side roads, past the gnarled oak, and then go round the little hillock at the top of the road and go by a little village at the bottom, and eventually get up at the same place, but I'm taking a completely different route to get there. So
the road less traveled.
Yeah, that's right. So giving a different perspective on the same story. So alongside that, there is something called the myth of Isis and Osiris. Okay, and that intersects, was another sort of inspiration that caused me to write the story and to delve into it further, and I'll explain why. In this myth, Isis and Osiris are king and queen of a kind of mythological Egypt. Mm-hmm. But Set is Osiris' brother, and he is jealous of the king and queen, so he kills his brother. And not only that, he unfortunately chops up his body and distributes the body parts around Egypt. So you start with something that's, his body is complete and whole, but then it's split apart into different parts. So I think that is the same story told in mythological terms that they are telling in the Bible about the Nephilim, mixed genetic interspecies creatures who were giants, who had webbed feet, who had wings, do you know what I mean? Who had animal heads, human genetics gone wild, because there was no stability. Right. The genetic had gone crazy. So, humans perhaps at the time, this is what I speculated in the novel, couldn't reproduce because they didn't know what they were going to produce, whether they were going to produce another mixed genetic creature. Now, in the myth of Isis and Osiris, Isis then brings back the body parts into a whole and brings them back to life. So you start with a a complete person, which gets broken up into little bits and then brought back into a new whole and brought to life. So that's another story element that I'm introducing into the story, because I think that's talking about, because the end result of that genetic mix-up is this new form which Isis has brought together and brought back to life, called the genes of Isis. Okay. So today we don't have this problem of mixed genetic creatures. You might have noticed, you walk down the street, thankfully, most people look like you and me. You know? Yeah, with sort of 2 eyes, 2 legs, 2 arms, etc., etc. So there's no instability there. There's no mixed genetics going on. So all this to say that my story is a fictional account of what stabilized the genetic. Because it's now stable, yeah? But in pre-flood times, it wasn't stable. Okay, so that's what my story, the core of the story, is about.
Gotcha. I kind of love this tie-in between having a mixture of both the stories from like a biblical viewpoint, but also mixed with sort of like that Egyptology where you go into talking about the gods and goddesses rather than just the viewpoint of what's told from like the story of Genesis or even like about the apocalypse. It's very interesting to me because I've always had a huge fascination with Egypt, with as many other people do when you're younger. And I learned about like the different gods and goddesses in school. And it's so interesting. But I do like the kind of aspect that you brought into the story of kind of merging the 2 viewpoints and also putting your own spin on it. Because when I was reading the little prologue for it, and he was talking about like Akasha and Hork. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes,
so Akasha and Hork, and you're talking about like the aquamarine sky waters. Can you describe like what that is exactly, the aquamarine sky waters, a little bit more to me? Because I'm really curious. I saw that.
You really want to go into this? You definitely. Really want to go into it? Okay, because I mean, this is mind-boggling stuff, really. Okay. If you go into the pyramids and you look at the pyramid texts, one of their longings was to return home. They wanted to go home. Okay? And the urge and the yearning to return home is I mean, it's everywhere and in everybody. So it's quite natural. Everybody wants to return home. But where is home? And that's a rhetorical question. That question is still haunting me because, you know, I think we have many parts and those parts all have different homes. But that's another matter. These Egyptians, there is a myth that some of the Egyptians who ended up in ancient Egypt lived on a planet behind the sun. Can you get your head around that one? And there's a whole, I mean, it goes into this in the story, but what they believed was that they had to cross the great waters and return home to the sun. Now, the great waters they refer to is another quite extraordinary phenomenon that is spoken of in esoteric realms, if you like, that the sun and the planet are either end of a solar gene. They are the appearing ends of a sort of very mysterious connected rod, if you like. You imagine a long rod. One end you've got the sun, and the other end you've got the planet, right? And every now and then, and the moon, by the way, is the pendulum, the timer, which adjusts the timing of what happens between the sun and the planet. So they are actually alternating. And what happens is there's a lot of water on the planet at the moment. About 95% of it circulates in the oceans, but 5% of it's in the clouds. Okay, roughly. And this esoteric idea is that on the sun, it's the other way around. It's a little planet where most of the waters are up in the air. Okay?
Yep.
And what you see as the light that shines from the sun, the beacon, the lantern that it is the radiation of the universe condensing on those waters in a kind of furnace. So the scientists might say it's oxygen being converted into helium in a very high pressure circumstance. But the esoteric understanding is what I've just given you. And you look it up. You can find people like, there's an old Yorkshire prophetess, old Mother Shipton. And she was a real person. And she said, men beneath water shall walk, shall talk, and shall talk, and shall even converse. Something along those lines. In other words, we walk underneath water. So how's that possible? And there are other references to the waters in the sky, and all this to go back to the conjecture, and this is what I explore in the novel, if you like, that at some time in ancient Egypt, I mean, this is sort of mind-boggling stuff, isn't it? At some time in ancient Egypt, a race came from the sun, came from this little planet. It's a green planet, by the way. And that's why the waters are kind of, can have a green hue. I don't know if you ever heard of something called the green flash.
I have, like, briefly. I don't know the specifics of it, but I have definitely.
It's a phenomenon that you get at dusk, mostly seen at sea by sailors. And I've included it in one of my novels, in fact, the Drake novel. It's a flash of green that comes just as the sun goes beneath the horizon.
Okay.
Where's that green come from? So all this is conjectural because ultimately we don't really know, or do we? You know. So anyway, to go back to the pyramid texts, these guys thought they came from the sun because they'd been here. These were the angels, if you like, that had come here to try and sort out the mess caused by the first lot, who mated with the humans and caused the mixed race genetics. So an angel can't do much on its own. I don't know if you know that. You know, they just flutter their arms and nothing happens. But if you've got physicality, you can punch somebody. You can make a noise. See what I mean? So if the story's right, they manifested here. In other words, took human form, took physical form. These angels, these angelic beings. And there's all sorts of mysterious lore, Lore, about this. So the idea was, what they're saying in these pyramid texts, they want to cross the great water, return home to the sun. The great water that they want to cross is the waters of the planet when the waters of the planet are up in the sky and are sky waters and show a green hue because the colour that comes from the sun, the little planet, is green because it's a green planet. That's what they say. So have I blown your mind a little bit tonight? You did ask.
You answered exactly what I asked. So
yeah, I did. So that's what they were on about. That's what the sky waters are about. That's where the ideas come from. That's where the green aquamarine waters come from. I mean, if you go into it further, I mean, this is more mind-boggling stuff. You get into things like what baptism is really about. But that's another story, maybe. Then you get into other stories like what the gardens, what was the gardens called? Well, I'll think of the name. Anyway, say something interesting.
It just kind of brought me back to, because my parents, when they came to America, they were brought in through the church. So I grew up learning a lot, especially
okay.
like about like the living water. So I do have a little bit of a background in religion in that sense. And then we grew up learning about a lot of different backgrounds. And I grew up in a city, so very, very diverse group of people I grew up with. So it's always fun to kind of go back and talk about all these things, and also kind of reference all of our backgrounds and kind of see where each culture like kind of crosses over into the other, and where our stories are very similar to the other. It's like how we used to talk about how the Torah has a lot of similarities to the Bible, which has a lot of similarities to the scriptures and like Muslim texts and things like that as well. So it's very interesting in the Quran.
I mean, do you know where all those texts come from? Have a guess.
I want to say like the very first civilization, because it was Mesopotamia, like the river cities.
It could be, yeah. I actually think they came from Egypt.
From Egypt, yeah, that's also.
Yeah, I mean, hey, look, is it any coincidence that at the end of every Christian prayer they say a 4-letter word? Do you know what that word is?
Amen.
Yeah, and what is amen? An Egyptian god.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Anyway, I was trying to think of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon.
Oh yes.
Which I also go into in the novel and give a whole different slant about what confinement actually meant in those days for a woman who was with child. Because in those days, if you want me to go into this one, yeah, the belief was that a child was an addition to the race, which of course it is. Mm-hmm. And they wanted that addition to be to have the best possible opportunity as possible. And of course, that's what we believe today. But what was happening in those days, because they wanted every opportunity to be taken, they thought that every impression that the pregnant mother took in a way was vital or coded or influenced the growing child in their womb. Okay. So what they did was they would invite the pregnant ladies to spend as much time as possible in hanging gardens, to be surrounded by beauty, to be surrounded by natural things, and to be at peace, so that those frequencies and influences nurtured the child. Mm. And that's what confinement meant. It meant being confined to those gardens and things like that. You get the idea? I mean, it's sort of come down that idea that the influences on a mother can affect the growth of the child. I don't know if you've ever heard of or seen a film called The Elephant Man.
I haven't seen it. I've heard of it, though.
And the idea was in that there's a person who has kind of looks a bit like an elephant. And the derived idea was that the mother, during her pregnancy, had been frightened by an elephant.
Ah, interesting. So that ended up influencing how the baby. Yeah.
Now, this takes us nicely back to Genesis, because it's all about beginnings. It's all about how things begin. And that's my enduring fascination, really, with all my novels, including this one, is where did our genetic come from? And where do all these things come from? Where does the idea of confinement come from? Where does baptism come from? Where does it really come from? Not what we're being told, but, let's explore and conjecture or speculate some alternative ideas. So there you have it, Narry. What do you reckon? Do you reckon I'm nuts?
Absolutely not. But then again, all brilliant people are just a little bit crazy.
Oh, do you think so? Oh, okay. That's nice. Nice of you to say so. Yeah.
But honestly, I'm I've always was very enthralled with our last chat about the dragon's head, especially like delving back into the Great Wall and like the premonitions of the characters, and kind of getting to talk a little bit about, you know, Genesis, genes of Isis, and things like that. It's very fascinating to me. I've always loved and always been fascinated by these kinds of things too. It's like, where does humanity really stem from, and what's the core of it? So definitely, it's just been a blast, kind of just listening to you talk about the novel, and also just
this is you know, out the beyond stuff really I'm going into, but I've tried to give it you know, as much foundation as I can in the time that we've got, and of course that's quite difficult, because I could talk a lot longer about these kinds of issues, and they are fascinating. There's no doubt about it. They've fascinated me, you can tell.
Absolutely. And I mean, before we kind of wrap up a little bit here today, Justin, I did want to ask you, because I think last time I asked you about like what your the writing process was like for you, and like going through it. You did answer that quite nicely. Today I kind of wanted to ask you, because I know you've mentioned talking about Egypt, like having been there. Have you ever traveled to a certain specific area, especially for this one, with just the complete intent of having like an author's pilgrimage, of just kind of taking in all the sites and just wanting to be there specifically for your story writing?
What, in Egypt, or just more generally?
More generally, I would say.
I mean, it's more bits and pieces, but for instance, some of the novel I'm writing about Elizabethan times is set in London, so it's quite convenient that a lot of Elizabethan London still exists, even though it's you know, the streets are, like, interesting enough, about 3 feet higher now than they were in those days.
Right.
It's quite extraordinary how I don't know if you've seen some of the slightly older buildings in America, but they, you know, you have to sort of you know, they're not at the level that we are, because the earth accretes, you know, it aggregates.
Right.
So it was quite interesting to walk around some parts of St Paul's Cathedral in London, which is very, very old. The existing building obviously was built after the Fire of London, which was 1666. So, you know, it's really good to sort of soak in those times. I go to museums to look at objects, listen to music, maybe a little bit of those times. You know, I think it needs to be sort of multi-vectored, if you like, as much as possible. To hear the rhythms. I mean, it would be fascinating to see the speed that people walked at. You know, because mostly they travelled everywhere on a cart or on a coach. You know, whereas we take 5 minutes to drive down to the shops. They might take half a day to get to the market. You know, most people, although I still think this is a phenomenon today, most people in those times would not have left a 25-mile radius around their town in their whole lives. You know, they were inducted, if you like, by the influences of the land at that area. And I think that's what gives us accent in the first place. I think that's where accent comes from. That very subtle tenor, T-E-N-O-R, on the vocal cords.
Right.
It's got to come from somewhere. And it's clearly a strong print, because you can live in a place for 10 years, pick up an accent, and then move somewhere completely different. And very rarely do you ever lose the accent. So the print of where you live to begin with is very strong, if you see what I'm saying.
That's true. It's funny you say that too. My parents and I, we originally resided in Boston. That's where I was born. That's where I came from. So my mom doesn't seem to have a very strong accent at all. It's basically the way I talk, but there's certain words that she'll punctuate, and you'll hear Boston just through and through.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I wouldn't really differentiate the accents, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, so it makes sense. Definitely, like the area that you come from, it's hard to kind of shake that once it's instilled in you. I think it may also be like a developmental thing. If you're younger, you grow up in an area and that's just how you talk, it probably just kind of sets in your mind.
That's right. Again, it's a fascinating study. So that's the kind of thing I would do, explore those areas around there's places called Old Change, and some of the existing street names are still there, Bread Street, Fleet Street, obviously is famous for newspapers, but the River Fleet used to run north-south into the Thames. It's now an underground river. And the street was named after it, after the river. So, all these, again, it's back to origins, it's back to the genesis. Where do these things come from? And that's just one little example. You can spend the rest of your life, and why not, trying to explore some of these mysteries, because there's, there's a lot of them out there, aren't there?
Absolutely. So I think my final question for you today, Justin, is there a place that you have yet to go that you really, really want to go to visit in the world?
I hope you don't mind if I answer this in a slightly askew manner. I'd like to go to the place where I can be me. Yeah. Wherever that is. But it's more an internal place than an external place.
Again, it's like that longing of wanting to go home.
Yeah, it is. It is. Because, unfortunately in the world, we have to put on an act, don't we? And to some degree or another, we are imposters. We have to have an imposter life, which is not us. And don't we just yearn to be ourselves, and because from that place, I think that's where we can feel the passion of our lives and what we're put here to do, if you like, and to discover the great things that our lives were perhaps meant to discover and to create.
Absolutely.
I think that's one of the reasons I've settled into writing per se, which joins a number of fascinations for me to do with history, literature, research, esoterica, to name but a few. So thank you for a very interesting question and a lovely interview, as always.
Oh, thank you so much for, taking the time to sit down and talk with me. It's always such a pleasure.
Yeah, you've taken us off to the sun and we've come back and talked about baptism and the hanging gods of Babylon and what have you.
Justin, again, really, thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's always a pleasure having you on the podcast and being able to interview you and talk to you about all these different things. Yeah, for sure. And, what I meant by the art of the interviewer is what you're able to draw out of the person you interview. And that's the subtle art. It's really quite a subtle art. And I've had a lot of interviews. And different people approach it in different ways. But it's just, we do seem to have a correspondence, shall we say, which I thoroughly enjoy as well. So thank you for having me on. Thank you so much, Justin, for taking the time to sit down with us to do another interview. We always love having you here on the podcast. Before we go, is there anything that you'd like to say to our listeners?
I'm Justin Newland, and you're listening to the JeanBookNerd podcast.